Okay, I think we'll get started. We'd like to welcome Monica Montefalcone here today. We're very delighted to have her joining us from Genoa, Italy. Before we get started, however, I'd like to just say a few things to our students. We have a number of students who are taking this course for credit. It's a pass-fail course. The university would like you to go online and fill out a student experience survey. And of course, the experience really is just attending the lectures. If you would do that, we would appreciate it. The other important thing is that in order to get credit for this course, it's 2 credits, you have to jump through a couple of hoops. There's a little paragraph that you need to write about each lecture, and that paragraph is explained in the Canvas website. So there are 3 components to each paragraph. The entire assignment has to be less than 3 pages in length, and it needs to be submitted anytime, really beginning now or through next week, which is finals week. We'll accept those submissions up through the end of finals week. You can submit them to me through the Canvas website using the email function. If you just email me your little paragraphs, then I will be able to look at them in Canvas and give you your pass-fail grade. So if there are any questions about that, feel free to send me an email also through Canvas, or just send it to my regular University of Oregon email account, and I'll make sure that any questions are cleared up. Okay, well, welcome everybody to our very last seminar of the term. I've enjoyed organizing it. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Monica Montefalcone is a person that I've never met, never seen until this morning, although I've read many of her papers over the years. She is part of a team of very productive researchers at the University of Genoa. As I mentioned to her this morning, I've always been impressed by that group because they seem to be more productive than any group of scuba diving scientists that I know of anywhere on the planet. It usually takes a lot of effort to do underwater work, and it's slow to get the data normally. And these people just produce papers like crazy. Monica has, according to ResearchGate, which I looked up this morning, she has currently 143 publications. She's a professor, teaches marine ecology and conservation biology courses at the University of Genoa. And she has been working closely for many, many years with her major professor for her PhD, who is Carlo Nike Bianchi. And Monica works a lot in the local area in the Ligurian Sea, but she also has developed a strong research program in the Maldives, working on coral reefs and coral reef ecology. And I think she might talk to us a little bit about that. Now, you probably hear my cockatoo yelling in the distance. I'll try and get him quiet as soon as I finish introducing Monica. Monica did her undergraduate work at the University of Milan. And then she came and did a master's and PhD work, I believe that's correct, at the University of Genoa. She tells me that she was the only scuba diving person at her department in Milano. And so when she came to work with Carlo Nike Bianchi, he was very, very pleased to have a woman who was a diver. He hadn't found very many of those, and to find out that she was an enthusiastic underwater scientist. So Monica, I think if there's anything else we need to know about you, you can introduce yourself.
Sure.
Monica will give us a broad-ranging lecture that talks about many, many different things that she has done both in Italy and in the Maldives over the past many years. It's very nice to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Craig. Thank you for inviting me to these very interesting lectures that I had the opportunity to hear the last one. And thank you really so much to let me be part of your university on the other side of the ocean. It's really a pleasure for me to talk about my experience to you, because we are used to have meetings and to explain what we are used to do here in Italy, or at least in Europe, but it's not so, and we are not so used to move on the other part of the planet to talk about our experience, and especially about our diving activities. So it's really a pleasure for me to have this opportunity. I can try to share my desktop. Let me see, so I can start to introduce very quickly my research activity. I just have one slide to summarize my research activity. Okay, let me know if you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see that perfectly.
Perfect. So I can start. As I said, my talk today would like to show you my most recent research activity that I'm carrying out on coastal habitats and coastal ecosystem in the Mediterranean Sea and in the Indian Oceans. And especially I would like to show you how we are working to measure the change that these ecosystems are experiencing, and introducing what is called the sliding baseline syndrome that we observed when we tried to define the reference condition against which we are measuring the changes. So just as I said, a few other words to complete my presentation. I can say that, of course, I'm a marine ecologist, and just to few words to define my research topics, I would say that I used to characterize at the beginning the marine habitats through the thematic mapping and the cartographic territorial cartography. I'm used to evaluate the status of marine habitats, and usually applying ecological indices. So this is a kind of innovative approach that I've been developing since my PhD, the use of ecological indices to measure the current status of coastal habitats. Once I have defined and measured the status of coastal habitats, I'm used to relate their status to the human pressures that act along the coastline, and of course to evaluate also the effects of climate change, especially the effect of climate change. And I'm used to use historical information when it is available to measure change and to measure the trajectory of change of ecosystem through time. And so these are the main topics that characterize my research activity. But as you say, Craig, which is the main characteristic of my activity is the adoption of underwater scuba diving for sampling and for survey activities. Because I'm used to go underwater, I'm used to observe the habitat with my eyes, because I'm sure that if we want to understand and to perceive the changes that habitat and ecosystem are experiencing, we need to observe directly with our eyes those ecosystems, because we cannot understand completely what what's going on just looking at the pictures, just looking at videos, and even also just looking at maybe samples collected from the boat. So we need the perception to understand change in natural system. And these are only just a few examples of the underwater activities that I'm used to carry out. I'm used to take photographic sampling of benthic communities. I'm used to describe the assemblages using bionomic quadrats, or to assess or to measure quantitative information, usually abundance, through the adoption of quadrats as well. I'm used to describe the topographic features of rocky reefs, for instance, using depth transect, to describe the zonation of assemblages through the adoption of depth transect as well. Or I'm used to apply the method of the transect to take quantitative measures, different descriptors of the benthic communities, or simply to make visual surveys on defined surfaces. So the habitats, the coastal habitats on which I'm used to work are the four main habitats that occur in the Mediterranean Sea, that are the seagrass meadows, and especially the meadows of Posidonia oceanica, that is the endemic seagrass meadows of the Mediterranean Sea. Then in general, the temperate rocky reefs from the surface down to 40-45 meters depth, according to the limit of scuba diving. The underwater marine caves is another iconic habitat where I really love to dive and to make my research. And of course, in the tropical area of the Indian Ocean, the coral reefs, and especially in the Maldives, where we are carrying out a research activity for a long time. So this talk will be structured as follows. I would like to introduce very briefly the global change issue and the definition of the Anthropocene. I would like to explain how I'm used to evaluate and measure the current status of ecosystems, and of course the meaning of the sliding baseline syndrome. Then I will show you how we can define the reference condition against which we can then measure change. And finally, I'm gonna show you some selected examples of studies that I did in priority habitats of the Mediterranean Sea and of the Indian Ocean. So let's start introducing this, I would say, weird epoch of global change in which we are living right now. Everything changes, and everything has always changed in the long history of our planet. And change is something that we cannot escape from. We don't have to think at the change as a negative things, because the change is something necessary. We couldn't have reached such a biodiversity like the one we have today without change and without evolution. So even if today, when we think to the global change, of course, we gave to this term, to this phenomenon, a negative interpretation. If we think to the change in general in the history of our planet is something that is almost necessary. But the trouble is the time scale. The problem is that the time scale at which the changes are occurring today today is too short. It's too short, and is something that never happened till today. Because we well know that the main, for instance, one of the main driver of the global change today is the increase in the carbon dioxide emissions. You may see from these pictures that the CO2 concentration always fluctuated in the past millennia. And so it's normal to observe periods of high levels and periods of low levels. But as I said before, the problem is that a steep and sudden rise in the carbon dioxide is happening just after the industrialization. And unfortunately, it greatly exceeded the historical maximum. So this is the problem, is the time scale. What we are observing now is something that never happened in the last 2000 years at least. And here you may see what is one of the main consequences of the increase of the carbon dioxide emission in the atmosphere. That is the increase in the temperature, overall increase of the temperature, and the increase of the thermal anomalies, that are the fluctuation above the anomalies above the normal seasonal or year means. This is something that never happened before, and as a result, both land and ocean temperatures are rising today, and our oceans are getting warmer and warmer, and I would say in just one century and a half, something that never happened before, as I said. And giving a look to the effects of global warming in the Mediterranean Sea, that is the sea where I live and where I'm working, you probably already know that the Mediterranean Sea is a peculiar sea, is a long history, is a very old sea, and is a sea made up by a very high biodiversity. It's often called as an hotspot of biodiversity. The result of the global warming in the Mediterranean Sea is that the surface isotherms of February are moving northward, and you may see here the situation in at the beginning of the 90s. Here is the situation today, where the 14-degree isotherms is moving northward and is causing warmer winters. So we have warmer temperatures in our Mediterranean Sea, warmer winters, and this is happening in all our seas around Italy, from the southern and usually the warmer sea, like for instance the Tyrrhenian and the Ionian Sea, but also in the northern seas, like for instance the Adriatic and the Ligurian Sea, that are usually the coldest sector of the Mediterranean Sea. Temperature is increasing everywhere in the seas around Italy, and also is increasing. What is increasing is the seasonal variability as well. So those things that we call thermal anomalies, peaks or heat waves that are occurring always and even more frequently in the last decades. And to have a focus, especially in the Ligurian Sea, that is the sea that where I live and where I work, we can observe in the last 40 years two distinct phases of warming. We observed a first steep rise here around the 80 and the 90, then a steady maintenance of a steady temperature, and later in the last 10 years, I would say, another steep increase of the temperature. And this, of course, caused a lot of mortalities in many benthic species and the huge changes in the benthic community that I'm going to show you in the next slide. It is not a case that our weird epoch has been named the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene means something that is an epoch where the main drivers of change are due especially to human activities and to human development. Is something that if we have a look to this global map of cumulative human impacts, the explanation of the Anthropocene is rather simple, I guess, because the natural areas that are in blue color in this map are almost lost today. We cannot find any more pristine areas in our oceans as well in our land. And okay, these pictures are really extreme, but I think they are self-explaining of the meaning of the Anthropocene. And to conclude this brief introduction on the global change, I think that if our ancestors took a look to the situation nowadays, they probably would take a step back for sure. Okay, if you remember a few slides before, I showed you that the first observed effects of the climate change occurred around the 18 and the 90s. And here are some of a selection of some papers, of some studies that reported such evidences of changes occurred around the 18 and the 90s. And as I said before, a second steep increase in the temperatures is going on right now, and these are some papers that I published in the last 10 years, more or less, where I investigated this huge change that coastal ecosystems are experiencing in the last 10, 20 years. And to go to the second point of my talk, I would like now to explain you how I measured this change, because we understood that changes are going on in almost all marine ecosystem. Now I would like to show you how I'm used to measure these changes, to assess these changes. And usually the ecosystem status assessment is made by the expert judgment, or in most of my experience using ecological indices. I developed a number of biotic indices used to measure the ecological status, the ecological condition of coastal habitats. The second step is to, once you have defined the current ecosystem status, is to compare the current status with the status of a reference community, which means to define the baseline condition, that is the original status that we had before the Anthropocene. And here is the critical point, because when we try to fix the baseline, we may risk to face with the sliding baseline syndrome. What is the sliding baseline syndrome? As I said, when we have to measure change, we have to measure this change against a reference point, against the baseline. But sometimes this the definition of the baseline that we try to define can be already changed from its original status, because today our generation has lost the perception of what was natural in the past. We don't have the very clear the idea of what is a pristine ecosystem? If we don't have historical information, how can we define which is the pristine condition, which is the baseline? So it is possible that this baseline, defined today according to our experience, could be already shifted from the original situation. And this means that the baseline is sliding. We don't have clearly the expectation, the idea and expectation of what an healthy ecosystem should look like. So, practically speaking, depending on the definition of the reference point, we may have important consequences on the amount of change that we measure. So it's really very important, the definition of the correct baseline. And we must be very careful when we define the baseline. But fortunately, in our Mediterranean Sea, the European legislation helps us suggesting three possible solutions, three possible approaches to define the reference condition. We can look for the reference condition in the pristine areas, or we can reconstruct the reference condition using historical data. As a last chance, when we don't have any of the former ones, if we don't have none of the two pristine areas or historical data, we can model the theoretical reference condition. So we can modelize and hypothesize which are the theoretical original reference condition. But as I say, if you remember the global map of the human impacts, we realized that no pristine or no natural areas occur anymore today. So unfortunately, we cannot find pristine areas, and let me move. Okay, we cannot find pristine areas, and a possible alternative solution is to look for the reference condition maybe in the marine protected areas. And now, in the second part of my speech, I'm gonna show you some selected examples of these three approaches that I used to define the reference condition and to measure changes over time in priority habitats of the Mediterranean Sea and of the Indian Ocean, as I said. Okay, I will try to show you quickly the context of each study that I'm showing you, and only the main results, without, of course, explaining all the details. As I said, I'm gonna show you some examples of all the three approaches. The first approach is to use protected areas, marine protected areas, to define references. This is a study we carried out in the rocky reefs of the Ligurian Sea. We are in an area, coastal area, where a lot of multiple human pressure affect rocky reefs and benthing communities. We investigated 10 different stations here along the coastal area, and 4 of these stations were inside marine protected area. We contrasted the status of benthic assemblages in those stations, and what we found is that no differences occurred between sites within protected area and sites outside protected area. So the same condition, the same ecological condition within and outside the marine protected area. The second example, carried out always on rocky reefs in some sites along the Italian coastline and some sites in the French coastal areas, a total of 24 sites, and some of these sites were inside marine protected area. And again, we measured the status of rocky reef using two different ecological indices. And again, we found that the ecological status of reefs within marine protected area was almost similar to the ecological status of reef outside the marine protected area. The third and last examples of marine protected area approach is on seagrass meadows. I investigated 15 Posidonia oceanica meadows all along the Ligurian coastline. 5 of these meadows were inside the marine protected area. And again, the same results. The condition of seagrass meadow within marine protected area, absolutely the same of meadows outside marine protected area. So the first lesson that I learned using this approach is that marine protected areas, at least in Italy and probably in the Mediterranean Sea, are still too young, are too small, and not sufficiently enforced. And as you know, usually marine protected areas are designed to manage fishery, not to manage, to conserve the whole ecosystems. And this is why this approach to look for a reference condition in the marine protected area was not successful, at least in our experience. So let's move to the second approach, the adoption of historical data to set the baseline. This is a study that this is an area in the Ligurian Sea where we have a long, we have been studying since 1961 the rocky reef community using photographic samples. We are used to take photographic samples in different periods in the last 70 years, more or less. These are some examples of photographic samples in 1996 and 2017. That is the last surveys that we did. And what we observed in the community composition and its change through time is that, of course, some species got lost, some the losers, some others appeared the winners, and usually the winners are alien species. And in general, the community composition and community structure changed. In this graph, you may see the trajectory of change. The blue arrow is the trajectory of change we observed in the Bentham community composition from the 61 to today. In the last 60 years, we observed a huge change in the Bentham community, and probably today the community is in a new state, what we are used to call a phase shift. The community experienced a phase shift because today the community shows a completely different structure and a completely different composition. The second example is very similar, is another study we are carrying out in a marine protected area of the Ligurian Sea, always on the rocky reefs, from the 50 to today, so more than 70 years old of historical data availability. We did bionomic surveys in these 5 different periods of time. Again, what we observed in the community composition is a change from caused by the disappearance of the most sensitive species to the appearance of the most tolerant and usually opportunistic and alien species that became dominant in the community. And again, the picture of the community composition is almost the same of before. We observed a huge change from the 90s to today. In the state of the community today is completely different and greatly far from what was the original situation. The third example, here we are in an area of the Western Ligurian Sea. If you dive there in this area today, you can see a sort of dumping area on the bottom, a lot of rubbish on the bottom. And investigated the change of the Rocky Reef benthic community in the last 30 years, again, the trajectory of change is almost the same. The community changed. There is a signal, there was a signal of maybe we can say a recovery in 2009. You can see the trajectory tried to move, to return back at the origin, but then it takes a new direction, another direction, and today it is still in a new position, in a new state. The fourth example is these are very recent results. This is a survey that I did this summer, thanks to a project that I'm carrying out with in collaboration with the Greenpeace. The project is called OTSI project because it's a project that would like to evaluate the effects of climate change on benthic rocky reef communities. We are selecting a number of areas around Italy to measure the water temperature along the water column, so from the surface down to 40 meters depth. So we are monitoring the temperature of our sea, and in the same time we are monitoring the status and the condition of Rocky Reef benthic communities. We did the first surveys at the Elba Island, here in the middle of the Italian coastline, where we had the availability once again of historical information. And here are the 4 periods. Yes, we had data from 4 different periods from the 19th to today, and at 4 different depths, from shallow depth, 10 meters depth to 40 meter depth. And again, the arrows show you the trajectory of change experienced by the Rocky Reef benthic communities. And what we saw here is that at shallow waters, the benthic communities changed accordingly to all the results that I already showed you before, with almost the same trajectory of change through a new position, a new state. But in the deepest water at 30 and 40 meter depth, maybe some signals of recovery are appearing. At 40 meter depth, it seems the community completely recovered. On the contrary, the community at 30 meter depth tried to recover, but then it moved again toward another state, another direction. So at least a partial signs of recovery, at least at the deepest, for the deepest communities, was likely. Within the same project, we did also samples, surveys in Sardinia, in the southern part of the Sardinia island, within a marine protected area, where again we had the availability of historical data dated back the 2000. So we measured the change experienced by the Rocky Reefs community in the last 20 years, and again at the 4 different depth, from 0 to 40 meter depth, and the arrows show you clearly the trajectory of change and the change experienced by the benthic community. Is pictures very similar to all the other that I showed you, and here unfortunately also the highest depth, the 40, 30 and 40 meters depth, experienced the same amount of change of the shallowest depth. These patterns of changes occurred not only in the Rocky Reefs community, but also in marine caves community that is an habitat, as I told you, that I like a lot to survey and to study. We are very lucky because we have the availability of historical information on benthic community within marine submerged caves. That is something rather rare, I would say, because are not so available historical information within marine caves, we have the opportunity to have this long series of information that is dating back the 18th and the 19th in two different marine caves. I'm sorry, I come back to the previous slide. In two different marine caves, the one in the Liguria, in the Ligurian Sea, and another one in the southern part of Italy. In those two caves, we did photographic samples in different periods, and we were able to measure once again the change over time in the last 30, 40 years. And again, in the two pictures, you may see the trajectory of change of the benthic communities in these two different marine caves. Again, the community changed completely, and the community is moving toward a new state, a new completely different state, even in this peculiar habitat, because marine caves are usually very confined habitats and very peculiar habitats, and the same pattern of change has been observed also in this kind of habitats. And as Craig said at the beginning, when he introduced myself, I'm lucky because I have the opportunity to make a part of my research activity also in the Indian Ocean, and in particular in the Maldivian atolls, where we have the availability of a long series of data from the 1997 till today. We have been monitoring coral reefs for more than 20 years. We go in the Maldives every year to monitor the status of the coral reefs, and as you know, I think very well, the tropical coral reef are experiencing high levels of coral mortality due to global change. You know that there has been different periods in the last 20-30 years of huge increase of the shallow surface temperature. There has been a lot of peaks in the surface temperature, and especially there has been two of these peaks in 1998 and in the last one in 2016 that unfortunately caused a global, at the planetary scale, a global and mass coral mortality. Of course, this mass coral mortality also happened in the Indian Ocean, and we had the opportunity to monitor the situation and the condition of these coral reefs prior to the huge mass mortality of 1998, and then also during the last bleaching event and the last mass mortalities of 2016. And here you may see some pictures showing the situation before the mass mortality, during the bleaching event, and the mortality and the recovery of reef that it was considered, the recovery was considered attained after about 16 years. It means that the reef, the coral reefs of the Maldives took about 16 years to recover almost completely and to return to the pre-bleaching value of hard coral cover in the reefs. But unfortunately, as I said, just 2 years later, in 2016, there has been another huge thermal anomaly, a heat wave that caused another mass coral mortality. And now we are following the new recovery pattern, because many corals died once again. Unfortunately, we weren't able to take our yearly scientific cruise this year due to the COVID pandemic. But anyway, we are trying to follow the recovery of the Maldivian coral reef after the 2016 mass mortality. And here is a picture that shows you the pattern, the change experienced by the coral reefs in the Maldives, and the pattern, as I said, of the recovery. And here it's clear that the recovery was possible. So the Maldivian coral reefs recovered almost completely from the 1998 mass coral mortality. Then the values dropped down once again following the 2016 bleaching, and today we are here where the corals are trying to recover, hopefully, if no other bleaching event will affect the coral reefs in the next future. Okay, I can conclude this second approach on historical data, trying to fix some lessons that we learned from this approach. First, the second lesson is that when you work with historical data, it's essential to turn anecdotal accounts into robust scientific evidences. So we have to be able to translate the observation, the natural, maybe sometimes naturalistic observation, into scientific evidences. The third lesson is that when we manage historical data, we must be aware that the quality can be often low. I mean that the historical data have been collected with different technologies, usually low or not so high technology like the ones we have today. Also, the sampling design and the sampling method were different in the past. And also, it's very important, the differences linked with the observers, because there could be errors when different observers make the same sampling. So all these points must be taken into account very carefully when you manage historical data. Anyway, when you have availability of historical data, you have in your hands something that is really very precious, because probably this is really the only real information of what could be the historical situation, the original condition of our ecosystems. So the last approach that we adopted to fix the reference, as I said, when none of the previous two approaches are available, is modeling. If we don't have any other possibility, we have to try to construct or to define a theoretical reference condition, and we did this approach on Posidonia oceanica meadows. We were able to define the reference condition of Posidonia oceanica meadows in the Mediterranean Sea, according to a mathematical model that fixed the upper limits toward the coastline and the lower limits toward the open water of the meadows, according to morphodynamic and hydrodynamics features of the coastal areas. So we were able to draw the original surface covered by Posidonia oceanica meadow according to this model, and we applied this model in the Ligurian Sea to hypothesize the modeled original surface covered by Posidonia oceanica meadows in the reference condition, and we defined we established in the past the reference condition around the 1850, that is prior the industrialization and huge development that the Ligurian coastline experienced. So probably this is the reference condition, the modeled reference condition. Then, according to the historical information that we have for the Posidonia meadow in the Ligurian Sea, we were able to measure the extent of the meadows at the beginning of the last century, and with the black dots we have the situation of these meadows in the last years. I mean, these are surveys that we did in the last 20-30 years, and the result of this study is dramatic, I would say, because you can see that in only 1.5 centuries, we lost nearly the 50%, the half of the original extent of our seagrass meadows. To conclude with this last approach, the lessons that we learned is that okay, modeling is the last chance. If we cannot use any other of the two approaches, we have to modelize the reference condition, but modelizing the model development is usually very difficult. There are a lot of conceptual difficulties linked and associated to the model elaboration, and it's always difficult to identify the best descriptors to be used and to be adopted for the model elaboration. So it's not an easy task, I would say. And also to draw, I mean, the conclusion of my speech, I would like to summarize that you have seen from my results of my activities, all our ecosystem, all our coastal and marine ecosystem are changing. It's really very clear that the change is occurring in the last 40-50 years. Sometimes ecosystems are able to recover, to naturally recover, but often they are moving towards a completely different, a completely new state. And so it is difficult for us to foresee where where our ecosystem will be in the future, which will be the new condition of our ecosystem in the next future. This means that today we cannot imagine that our ecosystem will be able to return back to the historical reference. But realistically, we can imagine something that we call a target condition. I mean, if we have to manage to conserve our ecosystem, we cannot foresee to go back to the original situation, but we can only imagine to be able to bring our ecosystem and to get a target condition, a condition that is likely to be obtained in the frame of the sustainability of our seas. So what we have to do today is to understand which are these target conditions, and to define the target condition. To be able to define a proper target condition, we must know very well the history of that experienced the ecosystem, because if we understand the pattern of change and the trend that they experienced, we can be able probably to understand which will be their future assets, I mean, their future situation. And so to propose management action and conservation priorities. And to understand these trends, this pattern of change, what we can do is only from our side, of course, I'm talking from the side of researcher, what we can do today is to keep on monitoring our ecosystem, to monitor the status of our ecosystem, and especially to monitor the responses to pressures, to human pressure and to climate change. And this is what I'm trying to do in my activity. As I said at the beginning, I try to look at these ecosystems to perceive their change, of course, thanks to availability of historical data, to modeling, to all the tools that we can use to measure change. And keep on doing this monitoring will help us to understand the future of our marine communities and mountain communities. And this is what I'm doing in the frame of this project that I told you with the Greenpeace. We are monitoring the driver of change, so we are monitoring the change in the water temperature thanks to these sensors that measure the temperatures at each depth, and we are monitoring the effects of thermal anomalies, of change across the water column, the effects on the benthic communities as well. That's all. I would like to acknowledge all my colleagues. Here are my two postdoc researchers that are working with me. Here is Carlo Nichebianchi and his wife Carla Morri, that as Craig said at the beginning, they have been my teachers, my mentors, and I would say they are my reference point for my research activity. They are, and they will be always my reference point. So that's all, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. If you would stop sharing your screen, we can see everybody else. And then perhaps we can all give you a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If everybody would turn on their images again, their video. Let's give Monica a round of applause for
thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. There are likely to be some questions. Are you willing to answer some questions from the audience?
Sure.
I'm not sure what's happening. My computer is being unstable. My internet is unstable. Are you all able to see each other and to see Monica?
Yes, I can see everybody. I can see one hand.
Yeah. May I ask a question?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Once again, we have a speaker who's got a life that almost everybody in the audience would love to emulate. Thank you. What a wonderful career and life you have.
Thank you.
I'd like to know whether somebody has done the laboratory experiment of lining up, let's say, aquaria of, you name the organism, maybe corals. And here we have the normal temperature. The next aquarium is the normal temperature plus half a degree centigrade. The next aquarium is a full centigrade degree warmer, and so on around the room. If we did that experiment, what would we find?
Okay, I can try to reply to your questions only using my what I learned from the literature, because I I'm used to do very few laboratory activities. I'm used to work on the field. I'm more a naturalistic scientist rather than a experimental researcher. So I never did such kind of experiments, but I know that they are trying. A lot of researchers, especially researchers on coral reefs ecology, are doing this kind of experiments to investigate the ability of corals to face and to stand the different increase of water temperature. And in this period is really very important to understand the ability of corals to adapt to this increasing water temperature, and to understand the adaptability of corals. Of course, you need to set up laboratory experiments, because it's the only way to understand this phenomenon. And it's something that is going on right now, because the coral adaptability is something that has been observed on field. I mean that observing the recovery pattern, observing the effect of thermal anomalies on corals, especially in the 1998 mass mortality and in the last one in 2016, we were able to evidence a different level of mortality. Even if the intensity of the thermal anomaly was almost the same, or also someone say that the last one was even stronger than the past one. But corals survived at a larger extent than in the past. It means probably that they were able to adapt in a certain way to the thermal anomaly. So the adaptability is something that has been observed also on field, and is something that the researchers are going to investigate deeper, because there is really the possibility that coral are able to select a specific typology of zooxanthellae, that are the symbionts that lives with the corals, and probably selecting the most tolerant zooxanthellae, they are able to face and to resist better to thermal anomalies.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have questions? I can't see most of you, so just speak up if you have a question.
I have a question. I'm Nancy Treneman.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, thank you. That was a great talk, and I really enjoyed seeing the case studies where you were looking at some different areas. And my question is more about the marine protected areas. On your map, I saw you had this little bit of the cove, which has the protected area, and then lots of human development. And your comment that they're too small and they're too young. Has there been any interest, therefore, not just based on your work, but I assume others, in the Mediterranean to increase the marine protected areas, or to do something slightly different to get them to maybe function the way we thought they might? Or do you think they just aren't going to do it? They aren't going to function the way we'd like them to?
No, for sure, in the Mediterranean Sea, as everywhere in the world, we are improving the number of marine protected area, but not so much the size of marine protected area. But it's not a problem of size. It's the problem that some of the pressures that are affecting the coastal ecosystem cannot be excluded from the boundaries, of course, of the marine protected area. When we are talking about global warming, alien species invasion, ocean acidification, unfortunately, are all pressures that cannot be taken away from the marine protected area. So there is nothing, I would say, that we can do in this sense. We can only work at the global level to manage the problem. But for sure, the marine protected area are able at least to reduce which are the local impacts. So the management of fisheries, of coastal development, of course, are all local pressure that we know very well are used to act in synergy with global impacts. So if we at least are able to prevent this kind of local impacts, it's likely that our ecosystem will be more resilient in the face of global warming. Nothing else to do, I think.
Thank you. I mean, even getting rid of some of the local pressures is better than nothing.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, yes. You're completely right. We had the opportunity to compare the situation, as I showed you, of ecosystem within marine protected area and outside. And they say, of course, they are almost in the same condition, but anyway, the condition is better than in the area hugely affected by anthropization or urbanization. So for sure, it means that at least within marine protected area, we have a situation of higher resilience of our ecosystems, thanks to the lack of direct human pressure, I mean.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Monica, I remember hearing a number of years ago that there is an invasive alga in the Mediterranean that is damaging Posidonia meadows. Is that true in the area where you are?
You're right. We had a couple of problems with. We have some problem with a couple of invasive algae that are the Caulerpa taxifolia, that maybe you know also very well because it reached also the United States, and it became famous because it swam till the United States, and it invaded most of the rocky reefs in the Ligurian Sea, because it came from French, the Monaco Oceanographic Aquarium, and it reached also the Ligurian Sea coastline, and it was a great of great concern, especially for native species, and especially for Posidonia meadows. But fortunately, we monitored, of course, the situation of these invasive algae, and we found that since 2010, I would say so, 10 years ago, it started to decline, natural decline. So he had a huge expansion around the 80 and the 19, but then 10 years ago started to naturally decline. So today we have just a few small stands of these algae here in Liguria, and also the same situation in France. So it's no more a concern for us, but it has been substituted by the second invasive species cousin of Caulerpa taxifolia, that is Caulerpa cylindracea. Caulerpa cylindracea is another invasive alien algae that came from Australia. Is a tropical algae, and today it arrives in Liguria around 1996, and today he's widely developed all along the Ligurian Sea, in French, in Liguria, in Tuscany, in everywhere in Italy. It is a dominant species in the shallow water benthic communities of rocky reefs, and unfortunately it is substituting also Posidonia meadow. So today is the main concern for us, because it's really a very strong invasors, I mean.
Do you think the decline of the first Caulerpa species had anything to do with warming water?
No, I I'm not sure of it. It's not clear why the Caulerpa taxifolia started to decline. There are no theories on this phenomenon. Somebody say that is a normal phenomenon to see fluctuation in his life history. So it's something that probably already happened, but there is not a clear explanation. And we are not sure that is linked with the climate, because on the contrary, it should be a best situation today, the best situation today, I mean, with the warmer water, because they are both tropical species, so they should spread quicker in this in this warmer situation. And this is also why Caulerpa cylindrata had showed this strong colonization potential. So I'm not sure it is linked with the climate, but probably with the natural fluctuation of the species, or probably they find the species, the algae found competitive, some other competitive species in the endemic rocky reefs community. We don't know, actually, we don't know why, but it happens. And of course, we hope that we will be able to observe the same pattern also for Caulerpa cylindrata, because we are having some few signals right now of a small decline in the population also of Caulerpa cylindrata in the last 3-4 years. There are signs of declining, and let's hope it will follow the same pattern.
Thank you. Do we have any students with questions? Or anybody else? Okay, if not, then we will thank Monica once again for a spectacular lecture. Let's give her one more round of applause.
Thank you. It was really a great pleasure
Monica.
for me.
Okay.
Thank
we
you,
hope to meet
Monica.
you in person one of these days. And with that, we will end not only this session, but the seminar series for fall term. Thank you all for your participation.